It is your weekly program that remains concerned with the virtual gathering. That is, the gathering that occurs on air and online. I'm Sherwood McCaskie, as always. Thanks for your time. In last week's program, historian Trevor Marshall assumed a position 1,000 feet above sea level and provided aspects of the social and economic history that could be derived from a view below Hackleton's Cliff. In this week's program, we move to a more central location in the parish. Retired educator Jennifer Seeley will regale us with memories of her community and surrounding areas. She will be joined by her 33-year-old daughter, Toni Thorne. And yes, while you have become accustomed to the more mature and elderly folks carrying these programs, we could not possibly say no to a young lady who approached us glowing with excitement, asking to allow us to share her love for her community. The story begins here in small town and Cheshire. It's over to you, Jennifer.
I grew up in the rural parish of St. John. In later years, I got the word enclave, and small town is an enclave. It would be the Seeleys, the Parises, Leslie Paris's family. It would be the Masons, although they were at the very brink of Cheshire. But small town was probably about 7 houses. I called them, and then we have Cheryl Warren, Olu's family, the Rouses. Although that may not have been small town, we considered it. The Johnsons, the Graveses, the Flemings. So it's a little enclave with probably like an L shape. And then beyond that, you had Small Hope, Alistair Harris, his wife's family from that area. And as we traversed and we went further up Small Hope, you came upon Carter's. At the age of maybe 9, I moved to Carter's, walking distance. And let me shout out the Waith family. We were very close, the Messiahs. And so within that, as you went beyond Carter's, you got to Gull Hill. And Gull Hill is a well-known landmark. And Gull Hill means so much to me and my childhood because many friends there, Shirley Jordan and Joan Glasgow, the St. John community, St. John folk singing group, dramatic and folk singing group, the majority of us would have been from Gull Hill and its environs.
Just northwest of this area is to be found the Second Moravian Movement Station, established here in 1825. Well over 150 years after its establishment, Jennifer would begin her association.
Our childhood began with us going to Mount Tabor because my maternal grandparents were Moravian. My mother was Moravian. So it meant going to Mount Tabor Church and also going to Mount Tabor School. My mother was a teacher at Mount Tabor School. So we went to school at Mount Tabor for a time until she went to Erdeston College, and then we went to Cherry Grove. My neighbor in small town at the time, the late Mabel Graves, was the principal there, so she took us to school. And my aunt, Phyllis Seeley, she was there as well. So we moved from Mount Tabor for a year at Cherry Grove, and then we went back to Mount Tabor. But we had a rich childhood. We played in the cane fields right in front of our house. At Easter time, we would go kite flying. There was always something to do. We would eat golden apples, guavas. Those were our snacks. We didn't know about corn curls or anything like that. We may have some pulley. We may have animal sweets that we got at Miss Miller's shop. We would have sweet biscuits in the tin that you could buy maybe 10 for 10 cents, whatever. You drank hot liquor or took the syrup and made swank. My paternal grandfather was an engineer and he built cane mills. So my brother got one, so we would grind the sugar cane and make sugar, make of course, sugar cane drink, you know, and so there were guavas, there were soursops. We would make guava punch and freeze it, and those were our ice cream blocks. We had a very, very rich life. Akis, dunks, what have you. Those were the snacks of the day. If you wanted to make some sugar cakes from the coconuts around you, you did that. But as we grew older and we could ride, we would spend some time begging for, and I remember Olu's sister was very resourceful in this, because Olu would have had a bike, and then an uncle of hers that we called uncle that just lived beyond us, we would be able at times to borrow his bike. The Rouses, Samuel Rouse, who is at Barbados Community College, they would have their bikes, and we would go through small town. If you went beyond where I live, you ended up to Eastmont. The St. John's were at Eastmont Plantation, where St. John's family and his brother. And then we would go through Ashford, a Button and a Bowling. Sometimes we would go up right past Eastmont, and we would end up by Collyton. There were lots of cart roads that the cane trucks traveled, and then we would go around Bowmanston and come back.
Opposite us, well, when my mother was growing up, would have had canes, but when I was growing up, then those canes left, and even now someone has a cow farm there. And I just remember my uncle Dave Thorne coming and taking me kite flying. I then would go up the hill near the Carters and pick dunks with my friends. I remember it was only two of us in small town that had a bicycle, and we also had things like rollerblades, and we would share them with the other children, and all of us would ride down to Dr. Gill and come back up. So it taught you to share, and it taught you a sense of community spirit. So even though I was an only child, those formative years were extremely important.
The basic values and virtues necessary for community life, those that teach the importance of justice, access and equal opportunities among community members. Professor Sir Woodville Marshall, on page 476 in his book of Halls, Hills and Holes Place Names of Barbados, notes that the name small town is presumably derived from the presence of a number of small shops in the village. In fact, by 1885, it was known as the principal village in the parish of St. John. This leads us directly to the presence of commercial activity in the community and nearby communities.
In our community, oh Lord, I can actually smell a village shop deep in my palate. I do not know what it was. We had Miss Daniel, who lived in our community. Miss Daniel had a shop. I love the whole element of shopkeeping. So that became a part of our childhood play. You would get newspaper, you would fill it with dirt, and the folding. Sherwood, I'm not sure if you realize we didn't have plastic bags. We had gray paper. I remember distinctly, would be gray paper. They would be stocked with a lot of tin things. You had an open glass larder that may have some ham if you were a prosperous shopkeeper. You would also have the cheese, and there was something about that cheese. That cheese used to sweat. It was soft cheese. It was not in the fridge. And so if you had a cut of that with a cheese cutter, if you had a ham cutter from a village shop and a juicy, if you had the bread and two, you know, sometimes it would be corned beef cutters. Miss Daniel was closer to presentation. Then when you came by me and you went left of me, you had Miss Gall, Martinson and Keene and those Claire Gall, Jacqueline Gall. Miss Gall had a shop as well, wonderful village shop. And when you went down in Cheshire, I can't remember the name of the lady in Cheshire who had a shop. But you also had some small areas that you could go and you could buy eggs from someone. Eastmont became like a dairy farm. Up the road from me, you had Miss Miller. No, Miss Miller was the de facto shopkeeper. In a trumpeter box, you can get trumpeters. But in a trumpeter box, you also got your Vaseline to put on your hair. Miss Miller's shop was possibly the smallest shop, but everything was in there. The trumpeters, the embassies, the snuff, Miss Miller sold sweeties, animal sweets, the dollar sweets. The dollar sweet was a soft chewing gum in a metallic covering that was in the shape of a dollar. Puli, I don't know how many people remember Puli, but Puli was, as the name suggested, it was a soft, sweet, probably made from some kind of syrup that you could actually bite and pull. Chewy, very chewy. And anything else you wanted to get from Miss Miller, you could. And I loved Miss Miller. Miss Miller was a wonderful woman. I remember vacation time and I go by Miss Miller and I buy a tin of corned beef. Sherwood, my grandmother taught me to cook cuckoo because she didn't eat it and neither did my mother. So you had to wait till they were in a good mood, and my grandmother taught me to cook cuckoo. So that's how I became, cuckoo and corned beef became a big thing for me. I would go by Miss Miller. And people say, you can eat corned beef? What? Well, I go in there and make some today self. I would go and I would buy a tin of corned beef. After Miss Miller died, her son Franklin overseas, the Flemings took over that shop. The Flemings from small town, a little beyond them would be Small Hope. So that village shop stood out for me, Miss Miller. And as we went further up Carter's, there was Mr. Messiah. Mr. Messiah was a wonderful man. My friend Isa Messiah's father, and he had a big grocer. And my mother in that day ordered on a monthly basis from Mr. Messiah. And when Mommy moved here at Wanstead, when she married the second time around, that responsibility was mine as the eldest child. And so I continued the ritual of ordering groceries with Mr. Messiah. God bless him. And Mr. Messiah waited on you. And we would know what that meant. It meant trusting and paying at the end of the month. And if you had to go back, there was a phone call. So that I would call in my grocery at that time, my groceries, and just go, and they would be put in the back of the car or what have you. There was Mr. Nichols at the corner, but Mr. Messiah was the big grocery. And then as you got to Gore Hill, of course, there would have been the Yearwoods. They live not too far from here. John Yearwood, he would have been a politician, and he ran a big shop there. Mr. Messiah, he was very kind to us, and Miss Miller was the one to whom we went, because Miss Miller sold the things that we really wanted. I love village shops, mind you, and I was telling you the whole element of taking that paper and putting the meal, the dry goods, the meal and the flour and the sugar and the salt. Those are things that came in big barrels, and the whole understanding of the weight, how you would weigh things and how the old people did it. And I cannot say this without saying that my paternal grandparents ran a shop, you know, or a shop for the Tudors where they lived. So that whole thing about, there's something about keeping shop as children, and that was one of our playthings. But then things changed as you got into supermarket shopping. But I think Flood shop still exists today. Flood, that would be the Fleming's shop in small town.
These shops have played such a significant role in the lives of communities that they have now left a lasting impression on Jennifer. Another fixture in all of these communities was the church.
Cheryl's father and mother, they ran the Christian mission at Gore Hill. But when we moved to Carter's, a little further up from small town, right next door to the house that we rented in Carter's was Mother Seeley's mission hall. And we would go by the decorative blocks of our garden. I am so Sherwood, there's something that drew me. There's something that drew me to the cymbal beating and the foot stomping and the looking up and the dancing and the getting in the spirit. But my mother allowed us only to go to something called YPHA. Because Mother Seeley, this was a church that was led by women, powerful women. Mother Seeley, Mother Mary. I remember the Cheeseman mother. I would never forget. The women were dominant in that church. Mother Seeley lived just next door. And then when it was revival time, churches coming up from the length and breadth of Barbados, and the real hallelujah and getting into the spirit. Mommy allowed us to go on Fridays to YPHA. I don't know what that meant. We just call it YP. I'm thinking maybe Young People's Holy Assembly, maybe. And that was a Pentecost church, and my groundings were peeping through. But on Sundays, I wish that at times as a younger person that is where I could go, as opposed to the more traditional. So with that deep-seated in me, I believe that after time in my search, I ended up in the Wesleyan. And I got baptized there, you know. But the Anglican root is still here. But God is everywhere, you know. So that was a rich one. I must say that for quietude, there was something very encouraging and inviting about Verdun Catholic Church. And that was a church that was always open. I could smell it. It's on my palate still. And you could walk into Verdun. It's just around the corner. You could walk into Verdun and be welcomed. And I was a prayerful child. I remember living with my grandparents, and they had a 2-story house, and going on the very top landing. And I imagine all the steps going down. The stairs were filled with people. My congregation would have been. And I would be on top there preaching. Because significantly at Mount Tabor, what was a mystery to me as a child was how the priest got. Because he went through a door and you didn't know. So you thought it was something very magical. So he was on this top altar, so to speak, and he would be preaching down. So my childhood play, I imagined that all of those stairs, and I would be preaching to them. So going to the Catholic Church, I would go in and kneel and pray and reflect and watch Mary, and that was an inviting place. The Catholic Church, they would have many programs like cooking and baking, and they would invite us, Cheryl, all of us, Olu sister, we would go down and they would teach you to make pastries and cakes. They reached out into the community. So that would be my association with the churches. Very diverse, very different. You knew at the Catholic Church you wouldn't get any wine. That is how we saw it. And the Anglican Church, a little more open, and Mother Seeley's mission, which was pretty rigid and strict in Christianity. I have to speak of St. John Church under the leadership and the day. Well, we began with Father Woodruff, but the one that was very close and wonderfully dear to me was Canon Eric Payne. He was like a father. And my mother was synod representative, head of the Mothers Union. We had a rich life, going to church, doing outreach. That church did a lot of outreach, looking for vulnerable peoples in homes to give hampers to. I think of outreach in terms of spreading the gospel. I did a lot of that at a young age, going to foundation school. And that was another home away from home. The community of friends, Austin Hudson, as I said, Joan Glasgow, the Lashley clan, many of us, Lorraine Barrow and family, Shirley Jordan, we went there. And many of us were members of St. John Folk Group, so there was a lot of intertwining. And then some of us went to St. John, to St. Barbados. But Out of that, we had to go to church every Sunday. It was a must. My mother was not, and I think that was the same for the Lashley family, the Waite family, Shirley Jordan and them, the Cheesemans, all of us. We knew we had to go to church on Sunday morning. We were not committed to Sunday school. Sometimes we went to 7. We had to go to 7 with mommy, but then we went to 9. And if you went to a party the night before, my mother really wasn't interested in that. My mother would be knocking on your door at 7 o'clock. As a matter of fact, the night before, my mother would still be making sure that you had out your proper Sunday clothes and everything was laid out as it would have been for school.
As a child, I had to go to church. By then, my mother, like, she was so stuffed with church that she didn't go as regularly, but she insisted that I went. And I would go to St. John Parish Church, and I had to go almost every Sunday. And even though my mother had a car, my mother insisted that even though she dropped me there, I had to walk home. And I would walk home with the children of the area, and it taught you a certain sense of community spirit. I got confirmed at St. John Parish Church at the age of, I think, 7 or 9. My mother's telling me 9. And St. John Parish Church was very, very integral in my formative years. I remember the Easter bonnet parades, and my mother would go all out, and I could see it. I had costumes, and people had costumes, and they would parade, and all kinds of wonderful, wonderful things.
Recreational activities varied from communities to communities. Jennifer and her friends made good use of the available resources to enjoy nature and to recreate themselves, so to speak. There were a number of exciting trips that started right here in the community.
Don't talk about Bath Beach. That was our beach. I'm amazed that a mother as protective as ours allowed us in the summer vacation to just leave home. But of course, there were 3 of us, Ian, Angela, and Jennifer. Ian and I are twin, and my sister is right behind us. So my brother had to be there. So we went to Bath maybe 3 times a week. And we called upon our friends from Small Town to Gall Hill, Carter's. And we would meet and we would go right up by the cemetery, make the right turn, down Pot House, hot broiling sun. And we would end up near to the Earth Station and go through a trek there that would take us to a waterfall. And when we saw that waterfall, we used to feel happy. You couldn't even wait to get off your clothes and just plunge yourself in the waters of Bath. Bath was our stomping ground. And we would take sometimes biscuits and corned beef. By then, 1, 2, 3 was a big thing. We would get up and I would go by Miss Miller's shop and buy a tin of corned beef and some macaroni, a little cheese, and you make a big pan of that corned beef and macaroni, and you go with your friends, you had your mobby, what have you, whatever you had, you went and you took that, we walked down. Sometimes we would bum a ride on a truck or whatever, because it's one thing to go down those hills, but it's another to get back up. And you thought about that when the time came for someone like me, I would probably be saying, I ain't coming back here next week. But as you got over that hill, you know, sometimes the boys would push us over, you know, walk behind you and push the girls. But those were fun times. I got to shout out Roller Waith for this, and we had some wonderful days. I don't know how my mother allowed us to go, because we grew up here in the sea and got in the back door, but there was an element of trust that parents could place on children. You went out with the boys and, you know, you do your usual things. We had a lot of fun, and I'm not ashamed to say it. Sometimes it was so hot that you would drop your swimming gear in the water. But I am going to tell you, the boys like Roland and Eddie from St. John Folk group, those men never came close to us as women when we did that. And we didn't go venture close to them to go under the water to see what they looked like. They took their space and we took ours, and then we put it back on, because it was a beautiful feeling of the naked body and that water just caressing it. And we had wonderful days. We explored all areas of Bath Beach, not just the common ground, but sometimes we would go further down and see where it took us. And sometimes we would go to the left or we would go to the right and see all the beach houses, discover new grounds, and then appreciate that the part that we bathe closer to home, the well-known area with the shoal. We used to call it a shoal. We would go out on the shoal. The shoal is really a reef. And we would go out on that reef at low tide and we would walk on it. We would pick sea eggs. We would eat them raw. Sherwood, I do not go in any water that I can actually see what we would call a reef close by. There's something scary about it as an adult now, but it was so easy for us to do that then. Wonderful day.
Well, you are absolutely correct, Jennifer. I've just completed less than a quarter of the journey from Bath Beach to Small Town. I can't go another step. Now, despite all of that, I'm sure you wish that you were part of those exciting times. There is no doubt that not just the areas of Small Town and Bath Beach, but the entire parish of St. John means a lot to Jennifer and her daughter.
St. John was freedom for us, man, and kite flying and going to the beach and riding bicycles and playing dirty cuckoo with the Rouses and with Pat Rouse and Cheryl. And Pat was the best maker of mud cakes and, you know, making seasoning with breadfruit cow and cutting the breadfruit, flaking off the breadfruit cow. You know it's breadfruit cow? Breadfruit cow is the long stem, and especially if it's nice and green and you flake off that and you get the flesh underneath and then you cut it like you cut a fish. You can pick up your mother fish, you cut it and you take all of that breadfruit cow and you had some little moss like off on the side step that looked like little seasoning and you chip it up and mix it with a little sand and water and that was your seasoning. You were occupied. You know, you didn't have any time to be bored. And Pat Rouse made the best mud cakes. My mud cakes used to look ugly. Pat's were well contoured. She's a farmer today. So we had a rich life, fairs. We look forward to church fairs and going out and having fun and being decent. Boys were decent. My mother allowed all of our friends to come to our home at Small Town. You know, we can go and meet about anybody. They came to our home. Our house was an open house and we had a rich life.
Sherwood, I would move back there in a heartbeat. There's a charm that St. John has. Perhaps St. Lucie might have it, but there's a charm that's even how we talk. So I am always, and I say it to my mother all the time, traditional people, city mice would say, I am going to look for some work. In St. John we would say, I look for work. So things like that, I love it. It's Beijing, is, you know, it hasn't been spoiled by development, you know. And there are things that make the hair on my skin rise. So I think it's a charming place. I am hoping that people don't develop it too much so that I could buy a piece of the rock up there. And the people are genuinely, I would say, they're kind. And they have not been affected by development and the cons of development. Charming set of people.
Oh yes, what an interesting description, not from an elderly, but a young lady who grew up in Cheshire and a small town, St. John. Quite heartening indeed. Before we go, we must say a special thank you to Cheryl Walren, who extended her fine hospitality to us when we visited the parish of St. John. I'm Sherwood McCaskie. Thanks so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you again next week when we come around with my community, St. John. Thanks. Goodbye for now.